The nights in Doncaster were usually silent, offering little more than the rustling of leaves or the faint bark of a dog in the distance. During the day, the town's small community bustled with the mundane rhythms of routine. Neighbors chatting over fences, children darting from porch to porch. But when dusk fell, even the crickets seemed to stoop to a hush, and an uneasy quiet blanketed the streets. Something unspoken hovered in the air, an almost instinctual warning. I first noticed the footprints on a warm, late summer evening. I was returning from a late shift at the local diner, exhausted enough to crave only the solace of my bed. The moon, nearly full, cast silver outlines across the sidewalk. I saw them immediately, dark impressions that seemed to move in a trailing line across the asphalt and disappeared around the corner toward the church. My initial assumption was that some kids might have tracked mud down the street, but even in my half-asleep state, the footprints intrigued me. They were oddly spaced, each step unnervingly precise, like a carefully measured trail left on purpose. I stood there for a moment, considering them as the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. The following day, I went about my normal routine, brewed coffee, fed my cat, and got ready for another shift. Despite trying to put those footprints out of my mind, I could not forget how sharply they contrasted with the washed-out sidewalk. And though it might sound paranoid, I was sure I felt eyes on me all day, some slither of a presence lurking behind my every move. Each time I scanned the horizon, I saw no one. The air had changed. It felt heavier, more constricted, as if the atmosphere itself held its breath. At the diner, the regulars chatted about everyday life. No one mentioned anything mysterious, just the price of groceries, the upcoming harvest fair, and the usual gossip. Yet, in a lull between orders, I overheard a woman at the counter leaning toward her husband to recount a bizarre incident from the previous night. She whispered, "I saw footprints near our house. Looked almost like chalk outline." My ears perked up instantly. I wanted to approach them and ask what else they had observed, but the bell rang in the kitchen signaling a new order, and I had to rush back to grab it. As the days passed, more and more strange footprints appeared. They always surfaced at night, and by dawn they formed a trail throughout the neighborhood. Some leads ran down alleyways between decrepit buildings. Others snaked through front yards, stopping short beneath windows. Though no one claimed to see who or what made them, the phenomenon became the talk of the town. Parents scolded their children for playing outside after dusk. Neighbors installed floodlights that would flicker on at the slightest movement. Yet, each morning, fresh footprints replaced the old ones. The tension grew like a low-grade fever, constant and simmering. One afternoon, while carrying groceries to my car, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I spun around to see Carter, a local handyman and volunteer at the church. His brow was furrowed. "You've seen them too, haven't you?" he asked, a slight tremor in his voice. I nodded, studying his worried expression. "I think they're leading somewhere," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder to be sure no one overheard. "I followed them last night. They circle back behind the church. Then, they just..." He let out a trembling sigh. "It's like they go right into the ground." Despite the unease gnawing at my gut, I had to know more. That night, I set my alarm for 2 a.m., woke under a ceiling of thick shadows, and crept outside with only my phone's flashlight to guide me. Sure enough, fresh footprints lined the sidewalk, pointing, I realized with a jolt, directly toward the church. My heart throbbed an insistent beat. It felt as if the footprint's owner was tugging on an invisible thread, urging me to follow. The entire town was silent, and each shift of the wind made me jolt in alarm. Nonetheless, I let the footprints guide me. Down the darkened street, I kept my breath measured as I stepped in time with each fresh mark on the pavement. The moon hid behind a cluster of clouds, forcing me to rely mostly on my flashlight. The footprints guided me around the corner, past the church's front steps, then continued around the side, where the stained glass windows glinted even in minimal light. Beyond the church's cemetery, which was an overgrown plot of land seldom visited, the footprints twisted deeper into the night. In the center of that old burial ground, they seemed to converge around a large marble headstone, as if stopping deliberately. I beheld that marker in confusion and dread. Was the trail pointing to a single grave? I edged closer, careful not to trip on upturned stones or rub my ankle against the spindly branches from dead trees. My pulse thrummed in my ears. The footprints encircled the headstone in a neat pattern, as though outlining it. Finally, they led behind the headstone, ending abruptly at a patch of tilled earth. Agitated by the wind, the branches overhead cast shifting shadows that spooled around me in undulating patterns. I shuddered. It felt like I was trespassing on sacred ground. In the stillness, I realized I wasn't alone. A shape, a silhouette, stood just beyond the boundary of the tombstones. My blood froze. For a moment too long I stood paralyzed, holding my phone's flashlight fixed on the vacant darkness beyond the silhouette. The figure was motionless, arms at its side, as if waiting. Then, in an impossibly swift movement, it darted behind a branch-laden crypt, vanishing from view. My pulse hammered. I wanted to give chase, but fear paralyzed me. After an extended hesitation, I found the courage to step forward, scanning the darkness. However, the figure was gone. The only thing that remained were the footprints leading to that tilled patch of earth, and those footprints now seemed faint, as though the moisture-laden ground was swallowing them whole. I rushed home, scarcely able to quell my trembling. For the rest of the night, I tried to piece together what I had witnessed. Each time I closed my eyes, the silhouette's abrupt flight replayed in my mind. The next morning, images of the phantom figure and the pattern of footprints nagged at me. I drove to the cemetery in broad daylight, hoping the sun would lend clarity. The footprints, though diminished by the day's dryness, still remained. An inexplicable swirl of dirt behind the headstone convinced me that something was buried right there. I dared not dig on consecrated ground without permission. That weekend, Carter agreed to meet me at the church to see if we could figure out who or what might be the cause of these nightly appearances. He brought along a shovel and a metal rod for probing soil, all under the pretense of routine maintenance of the church's unsettled plot. "I talked to Father Brennan," Carter said. "He didn't say much, but he looked uneasy. Mentioned that historically the church property extended far underground. Catacombs? Old catacombs, but they were sealed decades ago." A ripple of alarm coursed through me. The town had never boasted about having catacombs. Why keep something like that a secret? We'd tried to remain inconspicuous in the church's cemetery, a narrow space with towering, time-worn monuments. Carter gently shoved the metal probe into the patch of earth behind that large tombstone, maneuvering it until it scraped something solid about 2 feet down. I felt a cold wash of dread. Carter gave me a tense glance. Then, without waiting, he began digging, spurred on by an unspoken urgency. The deeper we went, the stronger the stench of damp earth and rotting leaves became. After a foot or so, the shovel struck something wooden or stone-like. We cleared the grime to reveal an old trap door. We exchanged looks. It was real. We spent several minutes wrestling the trapdoor open, straining against decades of rust. Finally, it gave way with a jarring crack. A stale, seething odor greeted us, ancient air rushing out of an unseen chamber. Carter aimed his flashlight into the darkness. Rough stone steps descended into the bowels of the earth. I swallowed hard, adrenaline beating in my veins. We lowered ourselves carefully, hearts pounding. Each step echoed with a soft clap that hinted at a vast emptiness below. Once we reached the bottom, the flashlight illuminated rough-hewn walls stitched with spiderwebs. The corridor seemed ancient, lined with alcoves containing shattered stone caskets. The discovery was terrifying yet enthralling. A hidden crypt. Dampness coated every surface. Water dripped from the ceiling in irregular intervals, echoing into the gloom. Carter exhaled sharply. "This is more than some catacomb. Look." His flashlight landed on a series of symbols carved into the walls, swirling shapes in archaic letters. We moved forward in tense unison, uncertain what ghostly secrets we might unearth. Near one of the alcoves, a broken coffin lay half open. Inside, the remains of a skeleton slumped, ragged scraps of cloth still clinging to bony limbs. The entire atmosphere felt charged, as if the air itself was fraught with restless spirits. A creeping dread took hold in my gut. I remembered the figure I saw in the graveyard. Had it led me here, or was I simply fulfilling its silent mandate? Carter let out a hushed gasp when his flashlight caught a passageway branching off to the left. More footprints, faint, dusty prints that matched the ones outside, were visible on the crypt's floor, heading deeper into the corridor. Heart pounding, we followed. The path turned sharply, unveiling a larger chamber, lit faintly by a single candle atop an ancient stone pedestal. I couldn't fathom who kept this candle burning, or how they managed to do it without detection. The flickering glow revealed a series of sculptures arrayed along the walls. Chiseled faces that seemed agonized or trapped in eternal torment. The footprints circled the pedestal, as if whoever dwelled here made repeated visits. Carter took hesitant steps toward the candle and stifled a cry when he nearly stumbled over a small pile of personal belongings. A delicate gold watch, some tarnished rings, and a wooden child's toy. These objects bore signs of age, and I felt a pang in my chest imagining they might have belonged to townsfolk from decades past. We heard a shuffling sound, faint but unmistakable, from the darkest corner of the chamber. Carter swung his flashlight up, revealing a narrow conduit leading even deeper into the crypt. Then came a raspy breath. My mouth went dry. Fear seized every nerve in my body. Carter looked at me, and in the flicker of the single candle, his eyes betrayed desperation. We should have run, but the part of me that craved closure or truth refused. I needed to see what was in that darkness. Carter advanced cautiously, the beam of his flashlight slicing through motes of dust. The corridor's claustrophobic walls pressed close, and it felt like wading into a beast's gullet. Another shuffle startled us, followed by a single footstep that echoed. We froze. Something was in that corridor. Something that breathed erratically, as if recovering from exertion. We inched closer, scanning the gloom. Silhouetted in the far corner, a shape cowered. As the flashlight reached the figure, I drew a sharp breath. An emaciated man, pale as spider-webbed silk, with eyes widening in the sudden light. He pulled back into the shadows, trying to conceal himself, pressed against the crypt wall. At first, the man demonstrated frantic terror. Then I sensed a flicker of recognition in his hollow eyes, as if he'd expected us. His voice was barely a rasp. "You're not supposed to see this," he managed. Carter lowered his flashlight fractionally, as if not to spook him. I felt my heart hammering in my chest. Who was this stranger, subsisting in the darkness? My mind teemed with questions. Before I could speak, he raised a trembling hand. Although his face was gaunt, there was an otherworldly sharpness to his features. "Go, now," he whispered, "or you'll become part of the secret." Without warning, the man bolted toward a hidden passage at the verge of the corridor. Carter and I raced after him, adrenaline spurring us despite the suffocating fear. The labyrinthine crypt twisted, leading us past more alcoves filled with decaying coffins. The walls dripped with condensation, and sometimes cryptic carvings glinted in the flashlight's beam. Eventually, we lost him in a place where several tunnels diverged like a starburst. Our frantic footfalls echoed. We spun aimlessly, unsure which path he'd taken. In that disorienting gloom, Carter hissed, "We have to get out. This place, it's not meant for us." Reluctantly, we retraced our steps, following chalk marks Carter had left on the walls. The silence was nearly complete, broken only by the occasional drip of water. My mind felt raw with dread, trying to parse the presence of that pale man and the significance of the footprints. Back in the main chamber, the candle still flickered, unwavering. Carter said nothing as we lifted ourselves up through the trap door. Back under the sun's glare, everything felt muted, as though reality had shifted out of alignment. We replaced the trapdoor carefully and returned the loose soil, hearts pounding. Over the next few days, I found myself haunted by fleeting glimpses of the pale figure in unexpected places. A reflection in a store window, a half-hidden silhouette at the far end of a deserted street. I couldn't be certain if it was truly him, or if my mind was unraveling under the stress. The footprints continued to appear each night, weaving their cryptic trail toward the churchyard. Word spread throughout Doncaster. Panic began to set in. People spoke of ghosts, curses, or even demonic forces. Parents no longer let their children venture out after dark. The air darkened with a suspicion that fed on itself. Carter resolved to confront Father Brennan. Late one afternoon, I accompanied him. The church smelled faintly of incense and old wood polish. Father Brennan sat behind a grand oak desk in a small office, a deeply troubled expression etched into his face. He interlocked his fingers as we explained what we had discovered. He never denied the crypt's existence. Yes, he admitted gravely. There are catacombs, secrets from a time when this town was young. I'm telling you this because you've already gone too far to be left in ignorance. He paused. The crypt was originally used to store bodies during an epidemic generations ago, but among them was someone or something that could not rest. A chill raced down my spine. Father Brennan explained that the stories passed down through the clergy mentioned a hermit who lived beneath the church, a man consumed by obsession with mortality. He and his followers performed strange rites, the father said, voice quavering slightly. The church sealed everything after his death, but occasionally we'd hear rumors, people glimpsing shapes in the cemetery. His voice trailed off, leaving the rest to our imagination. Carter pressed for details, but Father Brennan only offered a warning. Pursue this curiosity too far, and you risk disturbing a spirit that refuses to sleep. As though on cue, that very night, the footprints multiplied. People reported seeing them in droves, crossing intersections and weaving through the entire neighborhood. It was as if the entire crypt's occupant had expanded its operation. Fear escalated, unleashing a kind of hysteria. Windows were boarded up, doors double locked. Few dared to leave their homes, and those who did traveled in pairs, flashlights at the ready. Restless nights bled into anxious days. We felt cornered, stripped of normalcy by an unrelenting presence. Driven by a morbid determination, I decided to return to the crypt. Carter refused at first, but his sense of responsibility convinced him. Under cover of darkness, we snuck around the church and carefully opened the trap door. Descending again into that subterranean gloom felt like walking into my own nightmare. This time we brought a small arsenal, headlamps, extra flashlights, and even a camera. We wanted proof. The footprints inside the crypt had grown more numerous and more disorganized, as if the occupant had grown restless. We searched each corridor, hearts in our throats, for signs of the pale man. Our footsteps echoed in the stale air until we reached the large chamber with the candle. The sculpture faces still stretched across the walls in eternal, agonized expressions. Oddly, the candle had gone out, yet fresh wax rivulets indicated someone had been there recently. Carter was about to say something when we heard movement behind us. We spun around, beams of light dancing over the cold stone. There he was again, the gaunt figure. He stood at the edge of our illumination, watching us. His actions were eerily calm this time, as though he had lost all fear. We stared at each other in a tense stalemate. Then he gestured for us to follow him. Without waiting, he disappeared down one of the side tunnels. Despite the knot of fear in my stomach, I felt compelled. Carter hesitated, but soon trailed behind me. Through twisting passages we walked, deeper than before. The man moved quickly, navigating the labyrinth with inhuman ease. At last, he led us into a hidden chamber more unsettling than anything we'd yet encountered. The walls, slick with algae, enclosed a round space. In the center, a stone slab rose from the floor, encircled by carved runes. On top of that slab lay an old journal and a single withered flower. The pale man waited by the slab, one hand pressed against the runes. "This is all that remains," he whispered, his voice cracking. "They tried to bury the truth, but it lives within these walls." A wave of sorrow, more than fear, shone in his eyes. Cautiously, I reached for the journal. The leather cover felt clammy, like it had absorbed centuries of dampness. In cramped handwriting it chronicled experiments, rituals, a determination to break the boundary between life and death. My stomach turned as I read about blood sacrifices, stolen trinkets from the living, and a belief that by communing with the dead, one could transcend mortality. Each page reeked of madness. "Father Brennan's hermit," Carter whispered. "He wrote this?" I turned to the pale man. "Who are you?" He closed his eyes, expression pained. "I was one of his followers, a long time ago. We believed we could conquer death if we offered the right tributes. The footprints, they're my penance. I searched the night for tokens, bits of people's lives that might quell him. But he never sleeps. His voice trembled with the weight of centuries. "I've become tethered to this place, damned by my devotion. Now I'm bound to pave the path back to him every night." A deeply unsettling sorrow washed over me. Carter's face paled. "You're a ghost," he murmured. Even as he said it, the man's shape seemed both substantial and not, as though he were caught between worlds. In the hush that followed, the man's shoulders sagged with resignation. "Help me end this," he pleaded. Suddenly a tremor ran through the crypt, as if the ancient stones shifted. The air grew suffocating. From the corner of the chamber came a low growl, a guttural breeze that ruffled our clothes. We all snapped around to see nothing, yet an indescribable malice radiated out of the darkness. The pale man seemed to struggle, as if waging an internal battle. He grabbed the flower from the stone slab, its petals crumbling at his touch. He pressed it into my hands. His eyes flickered with hope and warning. "Burn it, the journal, everything. Free me, free this town." Then the darkness roared, an invisible force slamming into us. Carter and I were thrown against the wall. The man backed away, arms raised as if trying to hold back an unseen behemoth. I heard him cry out as the force engulfed him. His voice echoed off the stones, twisting into something warped until it was lost beneath the thunderous pounding that rattled my teeth. Desperate to escape, Carter and I scrambled from the chamber, clutching the journal and flower. We half limped, half ran through the crypt's convoluted corridors. My heart hammered, throat raw from gasping. Behind us, a cacophony of snarling wind and scraping stones followed, as if the crypt itself was alive and hungry. By some miracle, we found our chalk marks and raced up the stairs. The night air never felt so sweet as we burst onto the surface, sealing the trapdoor behind us and piling stones over it for good measure. Under trembling starlight, Carter handed me his lighter. We wasted no time. First, the flower. It crumbled to dust in a flash of flame, then the journal, its musty pages catching quickly. I held my breath as curls of blackened parchment floated upward, carried away by the wind. Part of me expected the ground to tremble, the crypt to open anew. Instead, quiet. An uneasy hush blanketed the cemetery, punctuated only by our labored breathing. We spent the rest of that night outside the church, watching the trapdoor for any sign of movement. Nothing came. As the first faint light of dawn edged over the horizon, we cautiously left. The next evening, no footprints appeared, nor did they appear the night after that. The town's residents, though initially cautious, slowly returned to their routines. Windows were unboarded. Children's laughter re-emerged into the streets. It took a full week before some recognized that the nightly terror had ceased altogether. I never saw the pale man again. Late one night, I visited the cemetery alone. Under the moon's glow, I found fresh grass beginning to sprout where the footprints once converged. A lingering hush coated the night, but it was serene rather than ominous. I breathed once, deeply. Whether it was superstition or intuition, I sensed a presence finally set free. Doncaster could move forward unburdened, as could I. Still, shadows remain in every old corner of the world, and sometimes they stir. When the wind rustles a certain way, or the moonlight slips across the church's stained glass windows, I remember that crypt and the horror we discovered. No one speaks of it openly, not anymore. The official story is that the footprints were nothing more than a prank or weather phenomenon. No one will ever find that old trap door again. Carter and I made sure of that. The ground has been resealed and a proper memorial plaque set in place to honor the unmarked graves below. Perhaps it is best to let the dead lie undisturbed, their secrets entombed in quiet darkness. But there are nights still when I wake, half expecting to see footprints outside my window, leading me on a path I dare not tread. There is no sign of them. Yet, I recall the final words of the pale man, the anguish in his eyes. He believed redemption was possible. That belief freed him, or so I hope. And so this chapter of Doncaster's buried past dissolves into rumor and hush, an unspoken memory of that severed line between the living and the dead. Even in the hush of the night, the footprints are gone, and I too try to rest, trying not to remember the feeling of being watched in the moonlit darkness, longing to believe that no footprints will ever appear again.